This morning we talk about a little bit about social entrepreneurship, and we talk a lot about entrepreneurship where the the chief motive is profit. In social entrepreneurship, it's a little different. So we're lucky today to have Joe Keenan, who is president of the Graybeards, which we'll talk about a little later in the discussion. He's also an attorney, and I wanted to just take a couple of steps back for Joe to kind of introduce himself, talk about where he went to school, where he went to high school, where he went to college, law school, things like that, and how did he get onto this path that he's on today. So with that, because I think we have a mix of high school and college kids here today, just maybe, Joe, your roots, where did you start?
Sure. I grew up in Flatbush and attended Nazareth High School, which is in East Flatbush. From there, I went to Manhattan College. And when I graduated from Manhattan College, I went to law school in Massachusetts, Western New England College School of Law. So that's my educational background.
So, Joe, when you graduated from law school, what was the first job that you had?
When I graduated from law school, I started right away as a law clerk. They call it a law secretary. And basically what you do is you help the judge. It was a judge in Brooklyn, Judge John Delory. He was a Supreme Court judge, which is the lowest level Supreme Court in New York State trial. So I worked there as his law clerk for 3 years. Then I went to work for the Queens County District Attorney's Office, and I was an ADA in Queens for 3 years. And from there I worked for two different brokerage houses, E.F. Hutton, which is no longer in business, and Prudential Bates. I guess I got to move the mic up a little bit so you can hear me. And in 1989, I started in private practice, and in various ways I've been in private practice since then. Right now, I'm a solo practitioner in the Rockaways, right near my home. So that's kind of a thumbnail of my experience.
So two quick questions. Why law school? What attracted you to the law? And we'll get to the second one right after that.
Okay. I grew. My father was an attorney, so I kind of grew up knowing a little bit about the practice of law, and a number of his uncles were attorneys. I came from a big family, and I was the only one out of 8 kids to go to law school. But I always had, from a young age, I had an interest in going to law school. I have to say, when I was in college, at that point, like many people, I think in college, you're not certain as to what you're going to do in life. And my advice is don't really worry about that right now, because the way life goes, things change and your ambitions change. And I guess the best advice for college students I have is, to keep an open mind, have broad interests. But my career path, I'm very happy I went to law school, and I've been very happy in the practice of law.
So when you started in the legal system, which is very bureaucratic and somewhat rigid, I would imagine, and then moved to Wall Street, which was probably a lot less bureaucratic, and considering the two firms that you mentioned, they're both long gone these days, and a little bit more freewheeling. You then went into private practice. Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
It's funny. I don't. I really don't. And frankly, when Lou asked me to do this, I looked up what the definition of entrepreneur was, just so I would have a better understanding of it. But I guess anybody who's in a solo practitioner, in a sense, is an entrepreneur, because you have to develop business, you have to develop business relationships. And you're always worried where business is coming from, and there is risk, as there is in running any business. So I never considered myself an entrepreneur, but I guess that a solo practitioner is by its very nature an entrepreneur.
And do you, as a lawyer, do you have a specific type of law that you practice? Is it more real estate? Is it more criminal, civil, that kind of stuff?
It's the primary areas. It's a few areas. The primary areas that I do are real estate, some estate work, and then I have like a little niche in securities arbitrations, which I had gained experience when I worked at a couple of brokerage firms. And basically, the securities arbitrations are if a customer has a claim against a brokerage firm as to how they handled their accounts, you can file an arbitration, which is a hearing in front of generally 3 arbitrators. So I do have experience in that, and that's a part of my practice.
So you're basically your own boss. You have the world is yours. At some point, you decided to become the president of the Graybeards. And maybe talk a little bit about the Graybeards, what they are, how they started, and what journey they've been on.
The Graybeards are a real grassroots organization in the Rockaways. The organization was founded roughly in December of 2001. What led to it was there was a group of guys who had played basketball together. After September 11th and after November 12th, 2001, there was a plane crash in Belle Harbor, and our community was pretty devastated by those 2 events. Several individuals, a small group, got together and decided to start this organization, which the purpose of the organization was to kind of help people in the community in need. The mission statement was set out, very basic to help those in need. And over the years, it's evolved in many ways. But truly, the goal is to try to assist people who might be struggling, elderly, the infirm, sick, and it's very much volunteer based. I think we started with about 30 or so members, and we're up to a couple of hundred, and it's been well received, I think, in the community.
So, Joe, in starting essentially what is a 501c3 corporation, and we'll get into what that means in a moment, it grew out of a very dramatic time in the lives of all New Yorkers, Rockaway in particular, because they had so many people who were in the services of the FDNY and the police department and other first responders. So it's very dramatic, very upsetting time, and this group of people came together. Sometimes people do things just out of the goodness of their heart, and they don't do it on a formal basis. But the Graybeards decided to formalize their organization, and they were lucky enough to have lawyers like yourself involved who helped them through that process. So can you explain a little bit what a 501c3 corporation is and what's different about it from, say, a limited liability corporation or a normal corporation?
A 501c3 corporation is a not-for-profit. The great advantage to it is if it's approved by the Internal Revenue Service, people who make donations can get a tax deduction. So that was a real key with us as to why we wanted this organization. We were hoping to receive donations to help with the travel events that we wanted to do, and it was really important that we get this 501c3 designation. So that was the main purpose from that. It's different than a limited liability corporation, an LLC, in that an LLC can be for profit, it can be for nonprofit. The LLC is much easier to set up than a 501c3. And the LLC donations to it generally are not tax deductible. So the key with us was that it would be an organization so that people could make donations to us, and they also could receive tax deductions for it.
So in order to be approved as a 501c3, who do you have to file with? Is it the city, the state, the federal government, all three?
You have to file with the federal government first, and that process, unfortunately, does take it takes a fair amount of time now to be approved. I'd say 6 months to a year for it to be approved. You do also, once you're approved by the IRS, do also have to file with New York State with the Charities Bureau.
And I know we have some entrepreneurs in the audience today, people who have started their own business both at the college and high school level. For the most part, I think they're just starting their businesses, getting their business plans together, or they may have already started the business. Does a 501c3 corporation have to file income tax returns?
It depends on the amount of revenue they have each year. And where it hits certain levels, they do have to file 990s on an annual basis. Fortunately, we have as one of our board members an accountant who, a fellow named John Cosgrove, whose niche actually and his specialty is in the not-for-profit world. So we've been fortunate from the foundation to have someone who is extremely well versed in that and who does our tax returns on an annual basis.
So I'm just going to step outside of the Graybeards for a moment. For those in the audience that may have already started an entrepreneurial company or are thinking about it, do you recommend that they file to become an LLC, or can they simply operate as a sole proprietorship? And if they do, what might be the benefits of one versus the other? And the follow-up question to that is, what are the tax implications of that? How do they account for the taxes? I know I'm outside your legal.
Yeah, I guess there's a few questions in there. I guess the first is I guess you really have to consider what your purpose in the corporation is going to be, and what your intentions are, and what the revenue is going to be. The advantage, of course, of a corporation is it does provide you some protection from individual liability for your actions. The sole proprietorship does not give you the same protection, from a liability standpoint. As far as the the tax requirements, that will all be revenue generated, revenue based, depending upon how much your income is per year. Yeah.
So success will breed forms.
Correct. Success will breed more requirements, without a doubt.
So getting back to the Graybeards, you were involved in the beginning. You were a member of them for a while. Then all of a sudden, you became their president. Can you just describe how that happened?
That basically happened because we had a fellow, Steve Stathis, who had been the president for 13 years, from 2001 into 2014. And Steve had done an awesome job and basically was the face of the entire organization. He felt it was time that he needed a little bit of change, and also he's also ventured off into two of his own businesses. So he's a person is definitely an entrepreneur. He owns a surf shop, ran the Graybeards, and now he's opened a golf bar where you play golf. So he would be like a classic example of an entrepreneur. With all those changes, he was looking for someone to kind of step up and become the president of the organization. Like any volunteer-based organization, often you get asked, but I also had an interest in doing it and trying to, basically keep the organization alive in the Rockaways, where it's, over the years, in my opinion, is an extremely well thought of organization. Lou has been very active in it since its founding, and we've had a number of different people who have been active in it. So I kind of, I didn't want, all of Steve's work as well as a number of other people, to go by the wayside. And I also had an interest in the organization. It's been very rewarding for me. And I guess that's one of the things about the not-for-profit is, with any volunteer organization, you'll find out if you find something that you have an interest and a passion from it, that you oftentimes get more satisfaction out of your volunteering than the people that you were helping. And I found that over the years, and I think my sentiment is felt by a lot of the people who are active in the organization.
I think one of the hardest things to do if you have either a for-profit company or a not-for-profit venture is transition planning, so succession planning, and particularly hard in something like this where it's really something that came from the heart. And I should note that no one gets paid in the Graybeards really, except for maybe somebody who runs the office. There's somebody there who keeps it going each day. But certainly Steve didn't get paid. Joe doesn't get paid. So they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart. And so it's not easy to find people to take over the venture that you started and to keep it going. And in my mind, the Graybeards not only continued, but have even gone further than anybody thought they would have. So succession planning has been very successful with the Graybeards, and I see it moving forward. You should be working on your own plan right now, but how do you measure success in a venture like the Graybeards? Do you have goals? Do you have, you don't have a business plan per se, but you have plans during the course of the year where you want to accomplish certain things. How do you get that? How do you make all of that happen and then measure it?
I guess the easy answer to that is we've been very fortunate. We've had a kind of a very active board. The board of directors are 10 different people. A lot, pretty diverse as far as background. We have some people with accounting background, some people with business background, a number of retired people, which has been very helpful, because they have the time to devote it. And over the years, we started with a kind of a cut and paste bylaws that's Steve got from another organization, and recently we've tried to update them to like Lou said, make plans for the future. We do have systems in place now to try to replace the board. We have a lot of members who have been on for a long time. There's term limits for the president, thank God, so I'm not going to be there for 13 years. But I think like any organization, it's good that you have a way to get new blood and to get younger people and to get people actively involved. And that's something you have to think about with any businesses going forward. How do you grow and develop it, and in what ways do you get new people to come in?
The tax treatment that you mentioned before of people for people that donate funds to the Graybeards has been a very powerful incentive. Could you give a sense of the magnitude of the funds that you've handled over the years? I know you've had a relationship with some major organizations like the Robin Hood Foundation in New York City and others, but just as recent as the Sandy hurricane 4 years ago, you collected an amazing amount of money and then distributed. Could you give a sense of the magnitude of that and then how you go through the distribution process? After
Hurricane Sandy, that was pretty much our busiest time as an organization. Several weeks after the storm, we started meeting and planning as to how we could help the community. At the time, we were hoping to get 100,000 or 200,000 in donations. During the year following Sandy, the donations almost totaled $2 million. It was pretty incredible, and we began to meet the board on a weekly basis, roughly in early 2014, and then we met on a weekly basis, and we came up with a criteria to try to distribute the money. There were so many people in Rockaway, in Broad Channel, that needed help. We realized that we couldn't help everybody, so we came up with considerations, and we would meet. Generally had board meetings 2 to 3 hours once a week, and would go through the people's finances. Did they get insurance money? Did they get FEMA money? How bad was the damage to their homes? There were people who had loss of life. And we decided to give out amounts, either 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000. And it was based, there were a number of fires in Breezy. There were a number of fires in Belle Harbor. There were several deaths in the Rockaways. Fortunately and amazingly, nobody died in Breezy Point, where over 200 houses burnt down, and there was no loss of life there. But we kind of met on a weekly basis, and our goal was to get the money in and to try to get it out quickly, but try to get it out to people who deserved it as best we could. And there was a lot of thought into each person's individual requests. Sometimes there were hard decisions not to give money to people who deserved it, but there were limits on what could be done. And from the beginning of this process, the generosity of people was incredible. I'd like to say we had some great fundraising, but we really didn't. We were greatly helped by two young people in Breezy Point who set up a website, kind of similar to a GoFundMe page that you see today. These two young kids, one was in Catholic University, and the other boy, I forget where he was in. They were able, in several weeks, to raise almost $200,000. The problem is, once they got it, they didn't know how they were going to handle it. So we were fortunate that they were able to transfer those funds to us to get out to families, families that needed it. And I have to say, through that difficult time after Sandy, when the community was suffering, it was probably for a lot of us some of the most rewarding times as Graybeards to give, somebody who's lost their home or someone who's struggling with insurance claims. $1,000 may not seem a lot, but it did impact them, their lives. It also was important because just the idea that somebody is thinking of you and giving you, even if it is $1,000 or $2,000, to a lot of the people, it was really, really touching to them.
And I imagine that's really the mission of a socially entrepreneurial organization. But it's not just the money piece that the Graybeards are involved in. They're involved in a wide variety of community-based activities that really, in some instances, get hundreds and almost 1,000 people involved. Things like the run and some other activities. Maybe just talk a little bit about the activities
Sure.
that you help engage the community with.
Yeah, I guess a number of the activities that we've done over the years is we've tried to do spruce ups. That'll be like a house where a group of volunteers can go and in either in 1 day or 2 days, we can paint, repair, and we've tried to do that almost every year. So that's one event. We have a family fun run that's run by one of our members, and that gets about. This year I think we had about 500 kids running in the race. That had always just been a kind of just a community and a fun-based event. This year we used it also as a fundraiser to help a family in need, and that worked out well. We have the Harlem Magic Masters come, and they play basketball against some of our members, and that's a great event for the kids. We run a blood drive. This year we had an alcohol awareness a meeting in which kids came from 7th and 8th graders and also kids in high school, so that was well received. And basically, if we hear of something that we can help somebody in the community, we try to do it. It's been many varied events with a couple of core events that we have every year.
So, in your life, who would you say was a role model for what you're involved in today? Was there somebody that you can point to in your life that's that kind of guided you in this regard?
I guess the first thing that comes back to my parents, both my parents growing up were involved, very involved with different organizations. My father especially, he was on the board at my high school for many years. Even after all of us had graduated from Nazareth, he stayed involved with the school. He was active in different organizations like the Knights of Columbus and different organizations. My mother too, when able, was active in organizations. So they kind of were role models as far as that. Your education is key. Employment is important, but as part of that, you should think about giving something back to the community, and it comes back to you in so many ways when you get involved. I mean, first of all, you meet. In any volunteer organization, in my experience, you meet really terrific people because they're like-minded. Most, if not, I'd say all, but I'd say most are in it for good purposes. There's always in every organization there are people that are in it for the glory, to get their name out there. But I've found in volunteer organizations that most of the people are in it because they have good intentions, and you end up making friends and meeting a network of people who will help you throughout your life. So I guess my advice to all of you is, if you find something that interests you in a volunteer basis, do it and see if you like it. There's a fellow in our community, this fellow Joe Featherston, who I'll talk about. It's just kind of an example. On Saturday, I went to a dinner for Special Olympics. He started an organization in St. Camillus, which is a parish in Rockaway, and 20 years ago there were six kids that came. Now these are all disabled children with special needs. And when he started, it was simply they would come there and play basketball or play games, or they'd teach them different things. They started on Monday nights. They've been doing this now for 20 years. The group is up to 60 different special people, many of whom are good ages now, in their 40s and 50s, and then there's some kids. And this all started as like a simple grassroots organization that has accomplished incredible things. I know the volunteers, the kids who go and help, get a lot out of it. My son volunteered in high school, and I think it helped him. It kind of puts a perspective when you volunteer for something like that. You see people who are disadvantaged, who don't complain, who enjoy life, and you kind of appreciate your own, what you have, and So he's an example, I guess. Going back to the question, kind of who inspires you. There's a person who inspires me. Steve Stathis is a person who inspired me, just with his energy level and what he did with our organization for 13 years.
Couldn't agree with you more. I know both of those individuals, and they are terrific individuals. Most of what we've been talking about has been related to volunteerism, and I'm not sure if volunteerism is on the rise or decrease in the U.S., but you certainly do get more out of it than you put into it, and I agree with you that I highly recommend people who are interested in the social side to volunteer, because it gives you a taste of what that life is like, but it also gives you a sense that there's more to the world than simply going to work for a company, or even starting your own company with a profit motive. If your passions take you to that side of the world, there are many organizations that may not be entrepreneurial now, might be a little bit more bureaucratic, whether it be the Red Cross or CARE or organizations like that, whose main mission is to help people. And they need people to come and work there. And they need lawyers, they need accountants, they need people who are in the field. So it's something to consider when you, as you move along your own paths. I'd like to ask one last question, and then I'd like to open up for questions. Looking back, if you were to change anything, would you have done anything different in your path way back when in Flatbush, when you were going to Nazareth, and then to where you are today?
I guess in life you always wish you did certain things, but I've been pretty content with my life. I've been very lucky in so many ways. I really have no regrets.
Including breaking 3 hours as a marathoner? Or
Well, I wish I did that, but 3:02 was the closest I came.
Okay, so we'll note that you would have liked to have
I would have
broken.
liked to have broken 3 hours. Yeah.
It's not too late yet.
No.
All right, so with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. Do we have questions for Mr. Keenan? I see a hand going up. You're just fixing your hair. Okay. Okay.
This year was the first year that made money. In the past, we never really tried to make money with it. Our main fundraising event is we have an annual dinner, and that generates most of the revenue for the year. That's our main dinner, and the dinner is we do get a very good reception for that. We've had between I think a low of probably the first two dinners was small, but then they went from a range of like 350 people up to one year we had close to 600, I think, people. Yeah. And the main thing is it's a good time. That's what people go and really enjoy themselves, and it's extremely well supported by the community. That's our main fundraising event. We've done some grants, requests for grants, and that's worked out well also.
Yeah, one time you had a person who was involved who was a grant writer, right? And very kind of successful in being able to secure grants.
Yeah, it's primarily, I'd say, 99.9% male organization. However, Mary Tufts was our grant writer, and she's a Graybeard member, and she was extremely successful in getting us several grants, including a grant from the Robin Hood Foundation, and that was in the early years. Yeah. The grant writers is very much kind of a specialty. Yeah. So the people that know how to do it, it's then you have the debate. How much do you spend for a grant writer to get your grants? Yeah. Yeah. We were lucky. We had someone who did it on a volunteer basis. I haven't found any problem with that, really. It depends what the need is and how you get it out there, but most of the causes that we've had will generate a lot of interest because usually, I hate to say it, it's usually some sort of tragedy or somebody who really is in need. So getting donors has not been a problem over the years.
You have members who pay dues, and I know in the first couple of years the membership numbers rose quickly, but you still have new members joining each year, I think, right?
That is correct. Yeah. Our dues are pretty nominal. The dues are $150 a year, and the members are supposed to also give 10 hours of service in addition to paying the dues. The dues help to pay our overhead. We have a small office. We have one employee, and our goal is to try to, with the dues, almost pay for all our overhead. During Sandy, we were basically 100% of the money that was donated went to people. We had no administrative costs or none of funds that were donated were used for administration. I think that's a great part of the success, is because the people who might be down on the luck or need help or had a tragedy, most often people know them personally and care about them, and when you go out to the community and ask for help, there are people willing to do it. I'll give an example. There was a young girl who she played basketball for Boston College. A group of her friends, 4 girls in their 20s. She came down with cancer. They ran a local fundraiser at the Knights of Columbus, and Steve and myself and a couple others were asked to just help with counting the money. So I figured this, we're going to collect $20,000 or $30,000. In one night out of a KSC hall with a tent, people donated $180,000 towards her. Some people would just come, walk in, drop a check off, and leave. Others stayed and enjoyed the evening. But it was just an incredible example of kind of a community coming together. We've been fortunate, and we've had responses like that to events throughout the years. Where you're just amazed at the generosity and where it comes from. At a dinner a few years ago, there's a local fellow who did extremely well. He ran a little fundraiser at his house for a woman whose husband had passed, and I thanked him for that. About 15 minutes later, he came by and he gave me a check for $10,000 to the Graybeards. So it's funny, you never know where donations will come from, but if people think that what you're doing is for good purposes, the generosity comes.
And I don't think it's. The neighborhood is pretty tight knit and special in that way, but when the group first got together 15 years ago, there was a lot of discussion about whether a group like this could be franchised and brought to other neighborhoods, other states, other countries even, as a way of pulling communities together and doing good works. And that all comes up from time to time. But the thought was, this is a great model. It can probably be replicated in other places. Can you really do that? And 15 years, even though it seems like a long time, is a relatively short period of time, and so that might still be in the future at some point. The question was, when you first establishing the nonprofit, what should take priority, establishing the board or securing funds, right? Is that the question?
I would say the board. I would say the board, because I think you want to have a strong organization. You want to have people who are committed to it, and I think if you have that as a start, then the rest will come.
And I'll say this. I remember that time period 15 years ago, and there was a huge debate within the group, because you have people from different points of view, as to how the mission statement should read. It was really important to get the mission statement right, because that would be the thing that would guide you going forward. And then, as Joe said, the structure of the board and the rest of the organization, it really helps in being able to secure donations later. I think we're going to wrap it up here. If no one has any other questions, I'd like to thank Joe Keenan for coming down today and sharing his insights and experience with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.